And now I'm going to share the screen. And as it says, the youngest Seder king, a story in honor of Passover. This is a story by Shalom Aleichem. And we'll have to be a little patient with the story. The story has its twists and turns, but it's not really a story, just to warn everybody. It's not a story. Hold on a second. There. It's not a story that has a lot of plot to it, but it gives you a taste of reality, of a certain reality. So here we are. And the invitation is out. Who would like to be our reader for today?
I mean, I read last week, so.
Yeah, you did. I could start, but if I start having computer troubles, someone have to take over.
All right. Well,
I'll take over, or
Right.
somebody who might come in later.
Go ahead, Josie. It's all yours.
All right. The youngest Seder king. What a lucky child, that Yuzek. Everyone loved him. Everyone fussed over him, made allowances for him, kissed him and cuddled him. And who was this all about? Yuzek. Parents don't spoil an only child as much as those two sisters, Sarah and Rivka, spoil their little brother. Yuzek, and still Yuzek. Yuzek, please eat. Yuzek, please drink. Yuzek, please sleep. Yuzek, here's a sweet. Yuzek, we're sewing you a new pair of trousers for the holidays. Yuzek, you're going to go to the bathhouse before Passover. Yuzek, you're going to conduct the Seder for Passover. Yuzek, and still Yuzek. It's become tiresome to hear. They're taking a gem of a child and ruining him. So said the ladies who lived together with the sisters, all the while sneaking into Yuzek's hand a piece of honey cake, a strudel, a roasted chicken liver, a little jam. They all did it out of pity. He was, after all, a poor little orphan. There was a Jew named Raphael who was poor all his life and an asthmatic to boot with peculiar musical lungs. When he breathed in and out, it sounded like a bow scraping across the strings of a violin. This Raphael was an honest man, but, may he forgive me, he was also a luckless schlemazel, an impractical man. Perhaps it was because he was so honest that he was a luckless schlemazel. On the other hand, perhaps it was because he was a luckless schlemazel that he had to be so honest. They said about him in Kasrelevka
is the town that Shalom Aleichem created for all of his stories. Kasrelevka.
They said about him in Kasrelevka that if Raphael were not a schlemazel, he would have made a lot of money. And he might have had all that money in hand because he had been the foreman at Reb Simcha Leviner's distillery. And aside from his salary, he solemnly swore that he never profited from any other outside income. Reb Simcha Leviner was lucky to have an honest foreman. He respected him for it, paid him exactly 6 rubles a week, sometimes added a 10 ruble coin for the holidays, didn't charge him for Passover wine and a bottle of Passover whiskey, no questions asked. How else could it be? Wasn't Reb Simcha a person who understood how to show appreciation? But Raphael, the foreman, contracted rheumatism and finally a cold in the lungs in the distillery. And that's when those whistling, singing musical sounds began in his chest. Who was to blame? To be healthy, that was a gift of God. The healthiest person can drop dead suddenly, God forbid. Our sages have long said that, but you probably already know what our sages said. At any rate, Raphael's chest whistled and wheezed and sang until one time, it was between Passover and Sukkot, He lay down with a high fever and never got up. Raphael died, and what a funeral he had. Reb Simcha went all out. He himself carried Raphael's body out on the funeral stretcher. He himself helped carry him on his shoulders. He himself followed him to the holy place, making sure he had a fine grave. He himself supervised the digging of the plot. He threw in the first spadeful of soil, and when the child, Yuzek, chanted the first Kaddish with Ozer, the sexton, over his father's grave, Reb Simcha wept. My, how he wept. No one can know, he told each person separately afterwards. It is such a loss, it is enormous. And to the widow, he said, don't cry. I will not forsake you and your orphans. Trust first in God, then in me. And Reb Simcha kept his word as much as possible. The first few weeks, he paid the widow the same wages that Raphael used to receive. True, she had to go ask for it, not once, but several times, and that was for her not too pleasant. But I ask you, what did you expect? He should deliver the wages to her home? Seems to me it's enough to pay a person's wages after his death. You're coming to ask me for money, he once said to her, as if you are entitled to it, as if you had invested in my distillery. That day, the widow cried more than when Raphael was buried. When her two daughters, Sarah and Rivka, found out why their mother was crying, they made her vow she would not go back to Reb Simcha. But what will we do? What everyone else does. We will be servants. We'll wash clothes. We'll sew on a machine. Sewing on a machine was then in Kasrivlika a popular...
Kasrelevka. Good.
A popular occupation. One could earn 2 zlotys a day if one were willing to sit at a machine 16 or 17 hours a day. Getting work was no problem either. If not clothing, it was underwear, or it was hemming handkerchiefs. The hardest part was obtaining a sewing machine. Harder still, 2 sewing machines. True, sewing machines were available on installment, but where would they get the few rubles for the first payment? Go ask your rich friend, the neighbors suggested to the widow. Tell him that the girls will work it off. That's easy to say. Go ask your rich friend. But what doesn't a Jew do to make a living? The widow went to Reb Simcha's viner and found him at the best possible time, right after eating. Everyone knows that when you need to come to someone for a favor, you should only track him down after a meal. After a meal, a person is a softer touch than before a meal. Before a meal, a person is a beast. What's on your mind? The widow laid out her proposal about the sewing machines. Reb Simcha listened carefully, picked his teeth, got red in the face, perspired a bit and dozed off. He didn't fall asleep, God forbid, just snoozed, looking at her with half-closed eyes, thinking in the meantime about business matters and about his digestion. Reb Simcha was fleshy and overweight. His doctors had ordered him to eat more meat and less starchy foods. And wouldn't you know, Reb Simcha really loves starchy food, bread, noodles, kugel, anything made of flour. He knew it wasn't good for him, but when he saw it, he ate it. And after he ate it, he was sorry. So how are things going for you? He said to the widow when she had finished, and he had stopped dozing, gazing at her with half-shut eyes. How should things be going for me? The widow answered. You hear how things are going. May all my enemies have things go as well for them. That is why if I had money for a sewing machine, for 2 sewing machines, at the very least 1 sewing machine. What sewing machine? He said in surprise, now looking at her with open eyes. I already told you that my daughters want to do sewing, to become seamstresses, to sew on a machine. We don't have a machine, and we really need 2 sewing machines to be paid out on installments. That's a good thing, a very good thing. Seamstresses, sewing, earning money, excellent, very good. But at the time, a thought flew through his mind.
Same time.
My stomach feels so bloated. It seems to me I haven't eaten that much today, and one eye seemed to get smaller. But as the widow remained silent, he sat up and spoke further to her. Well, very fine, sewing, excellent, why not? I wanted to ask you, Reb Simcha, you've done so much for our sakes. Perhaps it would be possible that, upon hearing the possibility of a request for a loan and advance of money, Reb Simcha sat bolt upright. That what? That you could lend us the first payment for the sewing machines. Which sewing machines? The ones I'm telling you about. 2 sewing machines for my daughters, or at the very least 1 sewing machine. What do I have to do with sewing machines? Where did I come to sewing machines? Money, said the widow. My daughters will buy the sewing machines themselves. They sell sewing machines on time. If I put down 50 and in 3 months I pay another 25, and then I know, you don't have to tell me. As far as I'm concerned, they can do without sewing machines. Who ever heard of sewing machines? Then how will they be able to sew? By hand, you can't get enough work done in time. All seamstresses have sewing machines nowadays. You want them to be seamstresses? Oh, how terrible, how terrible. If your husband were to rise from his grave and hear that you want to make your daughters seamstresses, he would die all over again. Don't you know your Raphael was an honest and observant Jew? Men like Raphael are not to be found. If Raphael were to hear seamstresses, he wouldn't be able to hear it. He would, I don't know what. Reb Simcha spoke from the heart. He really meant what he was saying. And the more he spoke, the louder he raised his voice. Seamstresses, ha, fine work for a Jewish girl. Ha, we know what a seamstress is. And Jewish girls at that. Ha, Raphael's daughters, seamstresses. And how about me? You know your Raphael grew up in my house. I made a man of him. First God, then I. And who made his wedding if not I? Ha! And you want me to allow such a thing? Heaven forbid. What do you think I am? A stone, a bone, a piece of wood? Ha! As for the widow, she came empty-handed and she left empty-handed. She made a holy vow, swore most earnestly, may she not see her children grow up, that her foot would never cross Reb Simcha's threshold again. Better to become a servant.
Okay, so let's take a pause for a second. Any reflections, any comments? How do we size up this Reb Simcha?
He goes back on his word
Yeah,
because he said he would support her, but he made her come to pick up the money. Reminded me of when the Hebrews became slaves in Egypt, because one of the phraseologies, and correct me because I'm not sure I'm going to get it right. There was a Pharaoh who did not know of Joseph, and so this is it reminded me like and then the Hebrews became slaves because he didn't know of Joseph and what he did. And here, even though he knew what his Raphael did, he just went back on his word.
Yeah.
yeah. How does Reb Simcha
I
see?
have a, oh, I'm sorry.
Meryl, go ahead, sure.
I'm not going to say it out loud unless you want me to, but I think I know where this story is leading.
Really?
You
Yes. Should I say?
No.
No.
Okay. Okay, I won't.
Okay, well,
I'll
afterwards,
let you know. I'll let you know when we're done.
when we're
if I'm
done, then you
right.
have to be honest. If it doesn't come out the way you
Of
thought, you
course.
still
I
have to be
won't.
honest.
Okay.
Okay, and of course, so far we've met one really honest person, Rabbi Raphael, right? But look at what he got for being honest. How does Reb Simcha look at himself? How does he understand himself, you think?
Oh, he thinks he's terrific. He's helpful. He's careful. He respected Raphael. He doesn't want to see what he's really doing.
He's imbued with his own importance.
Yeah, well, first God and then me.
Yeah.
Right? First trust in God. I'm next. I'm right after. Right. Yeah, there's a certain obviously literally a puffed up quality to this guy. That's one of the things that we say about chametz, right? That chametz is the yeast that puffs you up, and on Pesach you're supposed to get rid of the chametz, get rid of that puffing up, self-important idea. But meanwhile the widow is at his mercy, and she's struggling as much as she can, and we see again and again her dignity is assaulted, her sense of humanity is diminished by a guy who really doesn't see that he's doing anything wrong, right? He thinks he's like you said, that he's really an upstanding guy here. All right, so she leaves, and again she's already made her second commitment never to go back to this guy. Then better to become a servant. Okay, now we're at the next section.
But it's easy to say become a servant. Raphael, the foreman's wife, they don't mean Raphael, do they? The foreman's wife.
Raphael, the foreman's wife.
Oh, I see. Raphael, the foreman's wife, a respectable housewife, like all of Kostrolevka's housewives, become a servant, stand at a stranger's oven, sit at a stranger's table. Better to die than live like that. And the widow wished she were dead. And this once God, the great Almighty God, he who is a father to orphans and a comfort to widows, was merciful to the poor widow and didn't permit her to suffer for long on this earth. Granted her an easy death, following some sort of internal swelling. She suffered some, but only languished altogether a little over a month and died. It so happened that in Kostrolevka at that time, except for babies, no one died. And the widow was buried near her husband, one grave next to the other. This was their good fortune. And now Yuzek had to say Kaddish for both his father and mother. And from that time on, Yuzek became beloved and precious to everyone who heard him chanting Kaddish in the synagogue, standing on a bench, screeching in his childish voice, Yiskadal, Yishkadash. Everyone who saw this young boy with his round little hat, his dark eyes and rosy cheeks, standing on a bench at the synagogue and heard him chanting the Kaddish, was riveted to the spot, sighed and turned inward to thoughts that were neither hopeful nor happy, because everyone can, God forbid, die. Everybody has children who can be orphaned. May it never happen. And everyone pushed a little something into his hand, a kopeck, an apple, out of pity and charity for orphans. The truth was, Yuzek was a gifted child with the kind of face that said, love me. And he was also smart, the smartest boy in his school. Reb Noah, the teacher, couldn't praise him enough, and the whole town lauded him. They really praise Raphael, the foreman's son, don't they? Yuzek, they say he'll grow up to really be somebody. And where do you find such a rarity? Among poor people on a trash heap? It's always like that. Who goes on living? Old Moshe Aharon can't walk, can't talk. Who dies? Reb Simchala's son-in-law, strong, healthy, a father of children, a young man with money, he goes and dies. That's the world. Oh, wait a minute.
You talk.
You talk about Reb Simchala's son-in-law? How about Pacey, the rich man's daughter-in-law? How is she managing? I wouldn't call it managing. They've already brought the specialists from Yehupitz down 3 times. Really? I should earn half as much as that will cost them. God in heaven. That's the world for you. That's the way the world goes. That was how people in Kreslevek got taught. Criticizing the work of the Almighty, why he grants years to some and not to others, why he grants riches to this one and to that one nothing, why he grants bright children to this one and not, oh, the devil take it all. It never occurred to them to ask how these bright children survived. What did they eat? Who clothed them? Why didn't they freeze during the long winters in cold cellars? Why didn't they grow up crippled, hunchbacked, destined to be paupers, unwanted, miserable souls on earth? Luckily, the sisters, Sarah and Rivka, were able to scrape together enough money for a sewing machine. And for that, they had to thank their 3 friends, Vasya the healer, Pessy the sexton's wife, and Sosi the used goods dealer, who shared a house with them. The 3 of them were able to put together enough money for the down payment. The rest would be paid out, and lo and behold, they had a sewing machine. What's so remarkable about that? They were human beings, after all. What else could 2 grown girls do with a young orphan boy to support? Even a snake, they say, looks out for its young. Can a human being do no less? One problem, however, was that the sewing machine clattered away day and night. Because there was, thank God, much work to be had, and both sisters worked at the sewing machine, taking turns. While one sister sewed, the other was cooking at the stove. And then when the other sister was sewing on the machine, the other one was preparing the supper. The sewing machine never stopped clattering, and the neighbors were holding their heads and quietly grumbling. What a noisemaker. But God is merciful. He sends a remedy for every ailment. The remedy was Yuzek. Every family experiences a time that is bleak and dark. Times are bad, business is not going well, the heart is heavy. Then along comes a little squirrel and the entire household is transformed. At first, the little squirrel squalls, screams at night with belly aches, doesn't let anyone sleep. But soon it grows some, stops crying, opens his eyes and looks around like a real person. See how it's looking around. So little one, so tiny one. The little squirrel opens its mouth, sticks out its tongue and begins to laugh. And everyone feels bright and happy. Just look, it's laughing. I swear it's laughing. Such joy, such an event, such a celebration. The whole house is filled with the baby, people carrying it around, forgetting their problems. Life's bitterness seems sweeter. There's nothing but pure delight. That was how it was with our Yuzek. Yuzek was the beloved little squirrel whom everyone adored and made a fuss over. Before Passover, they outfitted him like a prince in a little coat and trousers with suspenders, had a pair of little boots made for him, and bought him a new cap. The women promised to give him nuts and stuffed him with fried matzah meal pancakes, ruining his stomach and also almost killing him with kindness. Who asked you to stuff him like that? The sisters rebuked the women. Sha, look at them, will you? We give the child a pancake with schmaltz, and look how they're carrying on. That was the way the women justified themselves. And Basia the healer did everything she could to save the child. The night before Passover, they gave Yuzek a clean shirt and 3 groshens and sent him off to the baths. When he returned, they dressed him in his new outfit, and he shone like the sun. A royal child, they exclaimed to one another. May no evil eye befall him. May no angry eye harm him. And Yuzek took the little prayer book and went off to pray at the synagogue, said Kaddish, and returned home with a cheerful holiday greeting for all. He found the table laid out with matzahs, a decanter of raisin wine, bitter herbs, grated horseradish, chopped apples and honey, potatoes, and salt water. They had everything that was needed, except for one thing. There was no one to conduct the Seder. There was no Seder king. All 3 friends were without husbands. 2 were widows and 1 was divorced. None of them had any children. In fact, they did have children, but not living with them. The children had long ago left home, dispersed throughout the world. One was a craftsman, one worked in a shop, another was far, far away in America. It was luck or the lack of it that had brought these 3 women together in the same house, the house of Basia the healer, who owned it and was of the 3 the most well-to-do. Although they lived under one roof, cooked at one stove, made bread at the same kneading trough, each had her own table because it was difficult for 3 women to keep house and get along together. If you see women nowadays being friendly, kissing one another when they get together for a visit, sitting together and cracking nuts, don't be surprised. It's only because they don't live under the same roof, don't cook at the same stove, and don't make bread at the same kneading trough. Of the 365 days of the year, our women quarreled for about 300 of them. But I don't know what you consider to be quarreling. They never took anything from one another, didn't insult one another, didn't offend each other's dignity, God forbid. It was simply a matter of 3 different personalities were not always agreeing. For instance, Pessy the sexton's wife liked to bank the fire in the stove and cover it with an oven lid. What was wrong with that? But Sosie, the used goods dealer, had the habit of putting a pot of chicory on the hearth in the morning. That too didn't seem too terribly wrong. She certainly wouldn't push her little pot of chicory in among the pots reserved for meat. But Pessy, the sexton's wife, said that that wasn't a good idea because on account of a pot of chicory, you could ruin the challah in the oven. Said Sosie, the used goods dealer, let all her enemies be ruined. Pessy, the landlady,
Sexton's wife.
the sexton's wife, said that apparently she had quite a few enemies. Sosie, the used goods dealer, then said, I can't complain. I have enough of them. May they wither. Said Pessy, the sexton's wife, since when have you become so full of talk? Then Sosie, the used goods dealer, said, ever since I moved into this godforsaken place. So Basia, the healer, the landlady of the house, who was standing off to the side, her headscarf tucked behind her ears, a rolling pin in her hands, rolling out a sheet of noodles for the Sabbath, chimed in, I don't know why you feel it so godforsaken. Is it the little rent you pay? Sosie, the used goods dealer, answered, it's easy for you to say. You're a property owner and have Kanahara lots of money. Then Basia, the healer, commented, what difference does it make to you whether I have a lot or a little money? Have I ever taken anything from you? Sosie, the used goods dealer, responded, what is there to take? My poverty? Take it. So Basia, the healer, retorted, keep it for yourself in good health. Pessy, the sexton's wife, spoke up. No one is safe from poverty. We know plenty of capable housewives who own their own homes and still end up paupers. Worse than paupers, put in Sosie, the used goods dealer. That made Basia the healer angry, and she lashed out at Sosie, the used goods dealer. Then Pessy stood up for Sosie, and soon a shouting match broke out among the three women, a mishmash, a flood of loud words, a hurling of insults and accusations. She calls herself a peacemaker. What do you think of the nerve of that woman? If you don't like it, you don't have to marry me. Be quiet, Big Mouth, because you might catch a fireplace poker in the head. I don't know which of you is worse. Look who's talking. Take that, both of you, take that. Do you think it was as bad as it sounds? Blows? God forbid. Tongue stuck out, a nose thumbed, and that was all. Don't be offended by what I am about to tell you. I'm afraid that whenever you yoke three modern women together and squeeze them under the same roof, as our three women were squeezed together, I cannot guarantee what would happen. It's possible nothing would happen, and it's possible it would turn nasty, even nastier than with my three neighbors. I don't mean to insult anyone, just talking. But I return to my women. In spite of all the quarrels and the nasty exchanges that would erupt among them, they did not remain enemies for long, God forbid, because in truth, what did they have against one another? Did they threaten each other's livelihoods? One moment they fought, and the next they made up. And invariably when Passover came, they genuinely got along, worked together as one soul. All three baked matzahs on the same day. All three put up their crocks of borscht. All three bought a sack of potatoes together to save money. And all three sat down to the Seder table at the landlady's. Basia the healer and at the landlady's, Basia the healer, and together they held high the Seder plate, quietly repeating word for word as Basia read aloud from the Yiddish translation of the Haggadah. In the past, when Basia's husband, Yisroel the healer, was still alive, he would preside at the Seder. After Yisroel the healer died, one of the women's sons led the Seder. But now that all the children had dispersed, one this way and one that, and all that remained in the house was one male, Yuzek, the women wondered if perhaps Yuzek could conduct the Seder this year. Yuzek had been studying Torah for a long time. He was fluent in Hebrew. Why shouldn't he be the man of the house, the Seder king? Yuzek, do you want to be the Seder king? The Seder king? Why not? Who would turn down a kingdom? God help the kingdom if Yuzek is the king. And the three women and the two sisters prepared a tall pile of pillows as his throne. And when Yuzek returned from the synagogue with his cheerful good yontif, he seated himself upon the Seder king's throne in his brand new holiday clothes, like a true Seder king. There are three actions: yawning, laughing, and crying. These are behaviors that are contagious. We have no control over yawning, laughing, and crying. Almost at the high point of the Seder, after the youngest Seder king, Yuzek the orphan, had finished the lovely "We are bound to thank and praise thee," and the melodious hallelujah, and was raising the second cup of wine, beginning to recite the prayer with which to drink the wine, and as he started to bring the wine to his lips, there arose from the women lamentation, as if they were keening for the dead. How this happened, which of them first began to weep, is difficult to say. After Yuzek recited the Kiddush and began to sing "Slaves We Were," one of the two sisters remembered that just a year ago at that time, they were also sitting at the Seder, but it was a quite different Seder. Their father and mother were alive, and the two sisters had new dresses sewn for them for Passover. They could never have dreamed that this year they would need to be sitting at a stranger's table with strange women, and that Yuzek would be presiding over the Seder. One of the sisters' eyes began to blink, and her lower lip trembled. Looking at her, the other sister let fall one teardrop after another. And looking at them both, one of the three neighbors remembered her own sorrow. When Nati the sexton, her husband, was still alive, she was happy. That is, she was never really happy, but certainly happier than she was now that she was called the assistant sexton's wife, because Ozer the sexton, who used to be the assistant sexton to Nati, had been promoted after her husband's death from assistant sexton to sexton, and his wife, Nessie, had become so puffed up, my God, you couldn't get near her. As Pessy, the sexton's wife, was thinking these thoughts, she made such a sad face that Sosie, the used goods dealer, had to be stronger than iron to hold back her tears. Sosie was reminded of her own sorrowful life, how her competitors wouldn't allow her to make a grosh and dragged her customers away, tried to ruin her. Now she was remembering her oldest daughter who had died long ago when she was a child. Rossi was her name. If Rossi hadn't died, she would now be a grown-up woman, perhaps even a mother herself. And she also thought of her husband, how much he had suffered all his days, was a miserable cripple, a failure at everything he did, a sickly man. And Sosie, the used goods dealer,
Good, you're picking it up.
as she repeated Basia the healer's wife's words from the Haggadah, swaying back and forth with her, suddenly found her face wet with tears. And even the reader herself, Basia the healer, did not hear the words of the Haggadah that issued from her lips as if of their own accord. She also remembered her own sorrows, her children who left for that far-off America. True, they did write her fine letters assuring her they were making a good living, they were working very hard and were doing as well as anyone else. To prove how well off they were, they had sent her their portraits, which in America are called pictures, and promised her if their businesses would do better, they would send her a few dollars and a ship's ticket, and would bring her over to that vast, glorious land where everybody made a living, where everybody was equal, was where a person could fall down the street from hunger and no one would bother him. May her enemies choke before Basia would go there. She had children here too. Weren't they doing too well here? What could one do? It was up to God. Everything was up to God. So thought Basia the healer as she read the Haggadah, not realizing how she herself was weeping, how her tears were flowing. When the time came to drink the second of the 4 cups of wine, and the youngest Seder king paused to sip a little wine, all the women became aware of their crying, and Basia the healer scolded them loudly, dried her eyes with her apron, and blew her nose. Why have you all become crying in the middle of everything? What is today, Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av? What nonsense.
Oops, sorry.
The women calmed down as one of them brought the Seder king a pitcher of water and a basin with which to wash his hands, while another served the hot fish from the oven and a third brought the horseradish. The youngest Seder king made a blessing. Al Hakilat
Matzah.
Matzah. The women responded, Amen, and the holiday dinner commenced in silence. Wow. That's some story.
Yeah, some story. What do you mean?
Well, for a male writer, he sure got those 3 women down right.
All right.
It's
Meryl.
true.
All right, Meryl, now you have to fess up. Is this the way you saw
Okay,
the story going?
I was completely wrong, and I learned I was wrong, I think, on the very next page after I said what I said. I thought that the the rabbi who wasn't giving her anything,
He wasn't a
lending her
rabbi.
any money.
He wasn't a
Huh?
rabbi. He wasn't a rabbi. He
Oh,
was
what
a,
was he?
he was a
I
thought they-
businessman. He, you know,
I thought they called him Reb.
everybody's called Reb. Reb is like
Everybody.
Mister.
Okay, so what it was, Simchala or something?
Right.
Simchala.
Simchala,
Yeah.
right.
So I thought that he wanted to marry her
Aha!
and that he was depriving her of these various things so that eventually she would be so worn down and have nothing and realize that she really needed to get married, and there he'd be a hero.
Can you write this up so we can use it for next week?
Yeah, that's a good story.
Try it out. Try it out. Yeah. So you're a romantic. Shalom Aleichem is a little more complicated than just a straightforward romantic, right? You know, I mean, after all, like I said, there's not much of a plot here. But you know, you're putting in more plot than what Shalom Aleichem is doing, right? He's just like really sort of being a tour guide. He's touring. You know, he's leading us on a little visit and into a little bit the minds and the hearts of these people, a little bit of the social reality of what they're coping with. So what do we make of this little kid, this little Yuzakel?
He's doted on by his sisters, and
He's
they
dote-
needed him. And I, my assumption was it was Orthodox because they needed a man to conduct the
Right.
service.
This is old world. This is the old ways
Yeah.
of doing it. And this is, nobody knows anything about any other way to do it. This is the way to do it. So they need a man, at least, you know, symbolically heading up the Seder. Of course, who actually is really leading the Seder?
The healer's
Asya.
wife.
The healer, right? Basia the healer. She's called Basia the healer. Her husband of blessed memory was the healer. And now she's the healer, right? And maybe she was a healer. There's, you know, plenty of folk, you know, examples of you know, people going to women because they know the herbs and they know which bugs are the right way to, or, you know, and whatever, you know, what needs to be done. So she's a little bit on a little bit more solid footing. She has her own house. Everybody else is crashing or renting, you know, in her house to be able to survive. So there's, you know, we have this back and forth between a world of men and a world of women.
But
Right.
he writes with a keen eye, but he writes with love. You can tell he's not looking down on these people. He's saying these
No.
are my people. Yeah.
Right.
Very
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah. Carol.
It's interesting because when they were discussing who could be the new king for the Seder, they were could Yitzhak do it? But if he was old enough to say Kaddish for his parents, then to my mind, he's old enough to conduct the Seder.
He's not. He's saying Kaddish, but he's a little kid. He's still, you know, everything that we have here. They dress him, they dote on him. You know, he's a little kid. He's bright. You know, so he knows a little bit. He's already doing well in studying. You know, in Cheder. So the Cheder teacher is very proud of him. He's a little kid. He's not bar mitzvah yet. He's a little cutie pie. You know, I love that line where he says he has a face that says "love me." You know, that he can't help it. He can't help but be just a sweetie pie like that. So that's I think part of, you know, it's the story is called the Seder King, although 90% of the story is not about that at all. So what is this little kid? What place does he have in the life of all of these women? A lot of women there, right? Remember the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is everybody's likes to give him a little treat, right? Not just the sisters, right? They complain that the sisters are spoiling their little baby brother, but then everybody else is giving him. They can't resist. You know, giving him a little candy, a little piece of meat, a little piece of bread. You know, that everybody wants to give him you know, a treat and something nice. So or let me refine the question. Let's think about him. On the one hand, he's sitting at the head of the table, right? And he's got all these pillows piled up and he needs the pillows. Back to Carol's point, he's not a big kid. He's a little kid. So he needs to be able to, like we used to use phone books back in the day, to be able to sit at the table and be able to, you could see that, so you could see his head above the table. So they're piling all these pillows for him to sit at the head of the table, and he's the king and he makes the blessings. But what's actually going on in the Seder? And there's that very poignant remark, that everybody's thinking about last year was way different than this year, right? This is what's going on in everybody's heart and memory.
Everybody's
They're-
thinking he wasn't
They're,
there.
they're thinking, they're not reminiscing, but they're thinking back to the way things were. And especially when one of them was going to be given money to go to America and how everything's equal there. I at that point I had to laugh because things are not equal here. But it's like everybody was thinking about where they were last year and how things had changed over the year.
Right? Anybody have any happy thoughts? No. No happy thoughts. Everybody is, he says, if one person laughs, everybody starts laughing. It's contagious. If one person starts yawning, everybody starts yawning. But we don't have yawning here and we don't have the laughing, but we do have the crying. As soon as one person starts crying, everybody's crying. Is anybody, and of course, back with America, he puts in a little dig. He goes, yeah, everybody's equal. Nobody, if you drop dead on the street, nobody will bother you. They won't butt into your business. Everybody respects everybody else. You're dying of hunger in the street, nobody will worry about it, right? Which brings us back to to Reb Simcha. For all of his flaws, he still tries to look out for people in his village, who he knows have some problems. He takes care of the funeral. He takes care of the family, at least for a while. What about the words of the Seder? How much of the words of the Seder are reverberating for all of these participants?
The words of
I wouldn't say they were reverberating because after the second glass of wine, the Seder was quiet. So how can things reverberate if it's
Well,
quiet?
because that means that they had already, most of the Seder is done. All of the main part of the Seder, is with all of the talking and the 4 questions and telling the story. So all of that stuff was done already. Now they're at the meal. So they're eating the meal in silence. But they've had, most of what most people today in our community would experience as the Seder. How many people actually hang out for the rest of the Seder after the meal is done? So, that's the meat, so to speak, of the Seder is all at the beginning. But, what is that Seder actually doing for them? We talk about making Seders meaningful, and we had a wonderful series of programs about how to add more creativity to our Seders and how to be involved in our Seders and so on. What kind of picture do we have here of this Seder?
sad. It's solemn.
Super sad, and not just super sad, that Basia is reading out the Yiddish translation of the Haggadah.
Because they
Women
can't-
really don't know the Hebrew well enough. They need this kid, and I'm gonna, coming back to, again, who's the kid? What does the kid mean here in this story? But actually, all those words just like they go by like white noise, right? The Seder is supposed to be about freedom, about telling a story about overcoming, the worst slavery. What was one of the main ideas in how we're going to survive? Let's become servants. Let's hire ourselves out to work for nothing, for some boss, so that we can, at least get a bite to eat. And what's a level even higher? A seamstress. Hey, I can maybe make a couple of pennies if I work 17 hours a day.
Right.
And of course, what does Reb Simcha think about seamstresses?
Not much.
Yeah, he's outraged, right? All of a sudden, his pious outrage gets triggered. It's not just that he doesn't want to, lend the money for the sewing machine, because in the end, he could have lent the money, and he probably, and he knows it. He's not when it suits him, he's not stingy. But it's such a low grade idea, and maybe even a little whiff of impropriety. Seamstresses, how do you think they really make that extra penny, to be able to have that extra dress to wear or whatever? So all of that kind of like looking down your nose at that kind of stuff is here, and all of the celebration of the story itself.
Isn't there?
They make sure it gets told, they make sure it gets mentioned, but it's like it's in a different world, a different planet. So he's very loving, he's very compassionate, and it's also heartbreaking in a certain way. There's a real deep sadness
Yeah.
about where these people are stuck. We got taken out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. Nobody's taken out these people out of Kasrelevka with an outstretched arm. When does God show God's mercy? When he lets the widow, die quickly, so she doesn't have to, suffer for years and years of poverty. That's what he says about her when, after she feels so terrible being turned down about the sewing machines. So brings us back. Okay, yeah, Carol.
But the friends helped the sisters put money together to get the sewing machines. Why couldn't these friends have helped the widow?
That's what they did, but she didn't live to see it.
But why didn't they help the widow before she died? I mean,
They're all helping each other. They're all in the same boat. All of these friends, I'll give you 25 cents, and the other one will give you $1, and this one will give you another 50 cents. And they scraped together the down payment for one sewing. Notice that they couldn't get 2 sewing machines. They got enough for the down payment on 1 sewing machine.
but why couldn't this have been done before she offered to become a servant?
Because first she went to Reb Simcha, which he had the money. She didn't have to go and humiliate herself in front of 50 people to say, I need money. Can you give me 5 cents? And can you give me 5 cents? Everybody's struggling. All of those people that ended up, responding, that's another thing. They responded, when it was, it was like so bad that there was no way out. Everybody's trying to struggle for themselves, right? The 3 women, the woman with the used goods dealer or whatever, she goes, all of her good friends trying to drive her out of business because she needs to because they need to make a living, right? So this is a very tough place. So, okay, now finally, so who's this little kid? What is this little kid in the story? The little kid is the focus of everybody's. Give him a little piece of cake. Give him a little extra. Give him a little. Let's make him a nice little shirt. Let's send him off to the synagogue. Let's send him to the bathhouse so that he'll be spick and span and clean. He won't be like a ragamuffin kid that's dirty in the streets. He is, that little squirrel that he uses as an example, right? He's the one source of joy in this story, right? All of the sadness and all of the struggles and all of the just grim mourning and desperation. He is the one place where they see some redemption. He's the one place where they see maybe he's going to have a beautiful life. Maybe he's going to have happiness. Maybe he's going to be smart and beloved and find a way to live in the world without being all by himself. How could he be by himself? Look at how all of us are showering him with love, right? There's so much loneliness in this story. But this one little kid, he's enveloped in love. Yeah, Josie.
To say he's the optimistic future. Things will be
Right.
better.
Right.
Because it's not really going to get much better for the people in the story.
They're pinning all their hopes on him.
Right. So this is another one of those stories. We've had stories before where that's the big struggle. How do you keep hoping? How do you keep a little bit of positive outlook when it's so difficult, when it's so, downgrading and everything is pulling you down into that kind of struggle. And then this little boy, and it's an irrational, they don't say, guess what a tragedy, he's going to come out living just like we, right? When he grows up, he'll be miserable and he'll have losses and struggles. No, there's this like hope springs eternal, right? He's the karpas on the Seder plate, right? The spring vegetable, that extra little piece that says, okay, you know what? It could be different. It could be different. He's the Pesach story, right? He's the redemption. He's the real message that, Pesach is not an irrelevant story. That's what Pesach says. We were slaves. We didn't have any reason whatsoever to hope. And then look what happened. Yeah, Meryl.
I was just going to say that, the people that went to America, I mean, I think America was redemption for a lot of those people, or they expected it. My grandfather used to tell me, oh, we thought that the streets were paved with gold. He came over in around 1908 or 7 or something like that. And they thought that this was the way to have a better future.
Right.
Maybe if they stayed in their little shtetls,
Well, if they stayed in the shtetl, there's a good chance that they would have been murdered,
right.
but, exterminated. But their redemption didn't radiate over to the people that were stuck in Kasrelevka.
Mhm.
That was the thing, right? That was another part of this kind of like sadness, right? That, okay, maybe they're doing great, but that's not helping me.
Mhm.
All I feel is the distance. My children are not with me. Here at the Seder, last year, at least I had one family member with me. Now I have nobody. So all of those kind of promises and so on, they only go so far. They only go so far. But you're right. And that's everybody's a different part of the story. All right, we're going to conclude here. Thanks for coming out and listening to the story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When did he write? What
He
period of
died,
time?
if I'm not mistaken, I wrote it something. I think he died 1916.
1916.
Yeah, I think so. All right.